Man, this Mars hitting at 14 degrees Libra that I talked about earlier, and the moon just went to 16 degrees of Libra, which is starting to go into Arcturus, but actually goes into Hercules right there. And it goes into what you'd consider a higher etheric body of the collective. And I know the title of this video is what it is, and I come on and I start talking straight up about astronomy. And this is one of the hidden keys to it. And I have not talked in detail a lot about the business world, the finance world, what I knew before my activation and awakening, and what I knew and found out after walking through as a conscious being, getting out of spells and bindings that were all originally put on me because of what you would call business reasons. And it's been a busy day, and I'm tired. And that's why I'm doing it like this, and I'm also knowing how the consciousness is right now and getting this information out and on video does seep into the consciousness and the mass consciousness, especially right now, to assist the good people, the hard-working people, because that's who I have always backed, and that's who I still back. And it is why we kept going the way that we did, because my story in this lifetime, I started out basically, living on, I didn't come from a family in this timeline with a lot of money. I didn't come from in this timeline, because in other timelines and in other lifetimes, as you would call them, although for me it's been really the same one, I always did have. My family and my family lines that are within my true DNA are extremely wealthy. And my family lines in DNA also came with a lot of the information that I was talking about on the last video regarding ancient alchemy and originations of finance and ruling over large groups of people, which is why I was separated from all of that as Kristen Renee Genzel, which was my government adopted name, and I'm kind of moving around to give y'all a little bit more light on me. My government adopted name, and with the 1972 date. ever since I was a little girl, I was around business. Not big business, little business. By the time I was 8 years old, I was running the front of an ExxonMobil gas station and taking the money and the credit cards, and you know, this was in the 70s, so it was you know, counting the money, running a store. Everyone in my family line and a lot of the remnants and a lot of even the descendants in Texas started businesses. Whereas what I found, especially in the timelines that all of us walked from Generation X and those of us that were born in the 70s, in the 80s, we knew more about how to start a business. Make first dollar is what I call it. And I'm starting with the basics because I'm going to lead into a lot more. What I found and through my journey, realized that I interfaced, especially the past 6 years, with a lot of heads of or backers or even I would call them avatars that were sent into my reality to feed me information and to have me and my crew put together solutions for large industry concepts, especially in the years 2020 and 2021. After that, it got a little weird, so it wasn't as involved. It was more so seeing it all slip away and wondering what the F just happened, which I know a lot, everyone right now is asking themselves what happened and what can we do. To finish this first thought, what I found is that most business people, what they would call business people, money management people, finance people, even the CEOs that you might know names of and that you've known in your existence, especially, I would say, from the 2000s on specifically, and I'm pretty sure we can go back further than that, but I wouldn't personally have that information because I was in my 20s around then and I was coming up the same as others, and so I always saw those people, even though I was interfacing with CEOs by 27 in the line of business that I was in, and always sitting with the high ups of companies and just assuming, because I you know, that's what really shocked me, because I always assumed that the leaders of industry just had vast amounts of information, and you know, they were there because of their knowledge and there because of their leadership skills, and they just knew how to alchemize and build the business, and that's how it happened. But what I learned is that that was not the case. What I learned is that most industry leaders, especially in technology, especially in finance, all they know to do is make money from money. If they get to a point where they have no coffer or they have no backing, or they have no board of directors, or no secret phone call to get an extra 10 million or 20 million. They really don't know what to do. Now, it shocked me within the technology industry in Silicon Valley. I tell you what, that when I was traveling with that Biden fund, because realized that in 2020 I basically got passed on to the mob because of the AB negative stuff and what we're seeing passed around in the president stuff, and the brand, and all this. And what I'm really talking about is the crew that was the making of this brand that ended up becoming the nightmare that everyone's still, for some reason, hasn't got down to the bottom of. Silicon Valley and all the tech and the apps and all these array of companies that popped up overnight and seemed as if they could do no wrong and were just getting handed 5 million. I mean, I was around meetings in 2012, right before everything went sideways with me and everything got stolen, that, I mean, they were writing checks, $5 million, $6 million, $7 million to these young 20-something people that came up with one little bitty, it wasn't anything. When I had been in the technology industry since 96, and while I wasn't hands-on tech, which ended up actually being a saving grace for me, because it was more like, for instance, ExxonMobil was a client of mine, and I had 245 buying managers at ExxonMobil, and they spread out all over the place. And of course, nobody was talking to anybody. They were only managing their little departments. And all of us that were working in the consulting game in the early 2000s knew way more about what the company actually was doing and help. And one of the added values of being a consultant, because that's what they called us in the early 2000s, was that we did talk to everyone in the company. Whereas if you were in the company, you didn't talk to everybody in the company. You were extremely siloed. And that is really why, we got paid the big bucks, and we had best practices, because we weren't hands-on inside the trenches, which gave us a very high understanding of what was going on. From conceptual and understanding what technology was, and being inside the guts of companies like ExxonMobil and Dynegy and Waste Management and GameStop even, and all these large corporations, and seeing what and how much money it took to build the guts of technology. Because Unix boxes, and I'm not going to get all technical on this, but my point is, I assumed that because I got out of the industry, and I never really did business with just app developers. When everything went completely online and app is when I started getting out of the business. The CEOs and the leaders and the people that were architecting these companies they didn't own any of their tech. They were always utilizing what would be, in a way, free services that were built off of what I had been a part of building, which was the massive corporations, government corporations, NASA, all the medical hospitals, ERP software, where you're having to build every single stage. And all these youngsters, all they were doing was basically building railroad tracks on top of existing tech, not realizing that all of it was going in the original baskets of the people that were spending millions and billions in the late 90s, and especially from 2000 to 2010. That is also what ended up happening with everything to do with how money is moved, your Wall Street, everything was traded, even getting your jobs and the applications and the databases and how they were built and who owned them and where all that information was going, where all that information was really being housed. Even systems like Monster.com, LinkedIn is a great example of, because I was around through where that was Jigsaw, and then it became LinkedIn, and people like me and that were starseeds that were here in the early 2000s, and we were ancients, not realizing, because we should have activated, and everything that happened in 2017 and 2018 really should have happened in the year 2000. And we were ignorant to the fact that business is 100% spiritual and alchemy. That is why societies that people would call the Illuminati and the Order, and even Scientology, or even Greek orders, even business orders, even your all male clubs that were in business that were still running, because those beings were, and I hate to throw his name out here, but they were like your Trump entities that were very cognizant from a 200-year roadmap or a 300-year roadmap of evolution and of planning in order to set themselves up as the controllers and be the ones to build and XYZ. And that is how a lot of it ended up being secretive, because they were from the dark side and they were jumping in to timelines since well, I mean, per my understanding of what the time is, since 1958. And set up to do so from the planning of even World War II. All of that being said, in our current market, what the hell has been going on that I uncovered as I'm getting myself out of it, and as I'm having to break out of the bindings, break out of the magic, especially here in Texas, because magic, you can basically cross it out and put energy grid and dimensional jumps because of not just 5G, but your different layers of technical towers, your different layers of electric grids, your different, I mean, all the different plants, the way the cities were mapped out, because everything became quantum. And none of us really understood the depths of that. What ended up happening here in Dallas and in Frisco? Frisco, I know for sure I have, because I had to get out of it. I do understand how the web penetrates up to New York for sure, and then how it was motorized from New Orleans and California in these layers, almost like a wedding cake of consciousness that was gridded inside silos. What I know for sure is that here in Frisco, we were basically ground zero, and Dallas became ground zero for this experiment, if you will, of these elite forces that had the money to give to each other, because there really wasn't anybody really necessarily making money. They were just all sending it to each other to create avenues and lanes in order to do it again and again and again. I mean, in 2021, I mean, it for that whole year, it was normal for me once a week to hear beings talk about sending out 5 million, sending out 8 million, and just to each other. I talk about that in my cruise, and I haven't done it lately just because I'm not doing crap. I'm not going to manifest anything. I'm not going to create anything until someone shows up and does right by me and puts my name back into the matrix and puts my name back into the system, so that we can all work together. But realize that I mean, unintentionally, I even taught him some of this, because our crew was in 2021 and even into 2022. We were naive, and we if we can just get the website up, if we can just build the business, if we can just if we can just. And so we were using alchemy, and we were using every single available way in order to make that happen, not realizing that we were teaching him. And I mean, even Joseph, the one who tracked me and was the main one of all this, who I'll say again, I know he definitely was on the Momoa team, because that's who he was pretending to be, right? But, that's also linked into MJ12 and the dark side. and government contracts and all this, what you'd call the alien stuff. But no, it was just us. It was just us ancients that they had this massive tracking system on. And he even told me, because, towards the end of 2021, 2022, man, I'd get so upset, and I'd just be going on. And he was like, "Well, you taught me how to do it," and I was like, "Damn it!" But my crew and I's just send in 20, because you have to open a business line. See, these are things that we didn't know. We didn't understand that it really was like ants. If you take and really the best way to think about money movement and money currency in this dense energy, because remember, everything flipped, and it flipped again. And see, I'm even on here now because it's flipped again, because as we clear deeper and more space, we enter into these dense areas where it really is like an ant farm getting flipped upside down. And you don't realize that you have to create. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've had to, and my crew has had to, even just go to the store. We've got to go to the store, we've got to drive here, we've got to drive here, we've got to drive here. And then we don't even realize why we're doing it. And then a lot of time, this is your guidance, and this leads into the money thing, because realize that the same thing that I'm talking about right here on just making a way for you to get on an airplane, for you to create any new timeline, you have to lay it in this energy unless you knew about the route and had very specifics about the route. Now, if you're the one that's creating the route, then it's innate. It's natural. You just naturally remember things. You naturally remember when you got there, this was this, and you remember, oh, well, that was that weird thing that happened at the register. And, it was $22 on the money. I remember. So when that timeline happens, because you created it in a very dense energy, so you were the ant that went out first, and then you moved all the dirt, right? So whenever you get back to that route again, it's real easy for you to swarm through it. And when you're creating, that really is how it has to be done. When you're creating from pure creation. And when that timeline comes back again and lands, there's little bitty things that if you laid it, that you naturally know, oh my gosh, this is hooked into this, because you're being conscious, and whenever you're doing it, you're consciously doing it to create it. And so they were moving 8 million. I mean, I remember it was 5 million, 8 million. This is also in 2020, all these bullshit glove orders and mask orders, and realize that they weren't really sending the masks. They didn't give a shit about the masks. I'll give you an example. Some of the guys were trying to put together these orders because they's making commission. And it was 3M. Everybody had to have 3M gloves. Well, 3M gloves were sold out everywhere. So people were calling around. They found Honeywell. So they called back these, and this is Saudi Arabia. We were dealing with Europe. We were dealing with Saudi. I mean, it was people all over the world. People all over the world that were what you'd consider the elite, that had proof of funds, because that was the other thing. But they didn't, and so we called and we were like, okay, when it wasn't me. This wasn't me directly. This was some of the guys, and I heard about this in 2020. We can get 100,000 from here. We can get 100, because they didn't want 20,000 boxes of gloves. No, they wanted 1,000,000 boxes of gloves. Okay. And had to be from 3M. And then they wanted to do it in one big transaction. Well, how about we take 500,000 from here and we get them from Honeywell? Nope, 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 nope. Can't do that. And we were like, what the fuck? That's whenever we were like, what's really going on here? Because in the beginning, all of us were pure at heart. We had pure intentions for the most part. Even the ones that were sent to fuck with me realized that they had no idea the depths of it. Just like the good men and women that are working in these industries right now and are trying to figure out what the hell is going on. What they were doing then, after you'd find the gloves, is that there was a period of about 2 to 3 weeks. It seemed like all at once, everybody was in POF, meaning proof of funds. So it's just like whenever you go and buy a house, if you're going to buy 1,000,000 boxes of gloves and they're $10 million deal, then before we're going to ship out the gloves, then everybody was looking into everybody's bank accounts all at once and confirming these proof of funds all across the board. If you do not have any idea of like a gangster mindset, or if you, because really that's it is what and how everything was being run, like a fraternity game, like a I mean, really a gangster mindset. If you went to school and you were trained in this and you know how things are supposed to be run, the illusion was that is how things are running. But if you have no concept of swindlers and dealing with hoodlums and dealing with gangsters, then you miss it. You completely miss it. What's up? Now, a lot of groups, and so what did start happening then in 2021 is that you had crews being formed. But these crews were not just any crews. They were crews that knew that they might have had a couple of clones on them. They might have had, a lot of them were like raptor type beings. And they had a similar energy frequency to kind of like a cross. I mean, to me, because I always go back to like the three main ones, like a witch and a werewolf and a vampire from like a DNA sequence. They were almost, their energy was super intense, like super intense, kind of like a vampire, like a true vampire, not these bullshit whatever the hell, but like, you know, the ones that can stare you in your eyes and fuck with your head. But they didn't penetrate your mind. It was more, and a lot of them, African American, only because, and this has nothing to do with the black thing, only, and this is why, you know, they were utilizing the melanin body because of the power of the melanin in the density of the energetic, because they incarnated and they made them, they knew what the fuck they were doing. Right? And they traveled in packs. And their leader would be paying for him to stay in the hotels, paying for him to do this, paying for him to do that. And from looking afar, and this is how we should be doing it. See, we should be working in groups. We should be operating and in unison and putting all the money in together to pay for this, and then everybody gets their cut and da 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 da. But the purse was coming from what you'd consider the brand, the mob, the mafia, the whatever. And the intention, whether or not everybody knew what the group was doing, the intention was really bad. I mean, sex slavery. I mean, the bad shit, the bad stuff. But it was always in disguise of something else, and they were always doing those other things. Now, I'm on here talking about this for a couple of reasons. Number one, I'm praying that this gets into the hands of somebody that will get me in the room with the people that I need to get in the room with to explain to them where all the money is. And to explain to them how they were moving money from the 6th and the 8th dimension and flat out fucking stealing not only the money for the next 200 years that your family was supposed to make, but all the money from the lines from 800 years before. Not only your money, your body, your consciousness, your etheric knowledge, and the way that Saudi, because I mean it is what it is, Saudi Arabia tried to just come in and take over the fucking world. And let me tell you, what I learned, again, going back to, they knew what they were doing. They knew what gene counts to hybridize. And your Zeta Reticuli became your Saudis. And most of your, what you'd consider, now see, I don't know about the princes, because they seem to have a little bit more, because princes and princesses were a little different. But like, that Sultan Solomon, I swear to fucking God, that's Joseph. I swear to God. I mean, if you were going to sell out the entire world and come for Christ and the 144,000, and you was going to try to take over everything, I mean, who would you, I mean, that's exactly, I swear to God, that's who it is. I swear. I know I'm right. I know I'm right. Because even Texas was completely taken over by Saudi. The entertainment industry completely taken over by Saudi. Because Saudi would claim to have all the money. But no, they don't. See, I proved Arxiad. And this blew my mind. And why I know what I know is because I am the most ancient being down here. I mean, I was always the sacrifice since the beginning of time. I'm immortal. I've never died. And I was your earth. I was put into your earth. But see, I was put in there by the founding fathers because I'm judgment. I'm justice. I'm karma. I'm Libra. And I'm also Arxiad and Ming Dynasty made. Now, there's only one lineage that's older than Arab of your AB, because it's right there. It's your ABs, okay? And the consciousness of it, and the Quran, and the moon mansions, and everything that goes back from Amun-Ra and the original Egyptians. But the whole Egyptian stuff was a timeline and an entire era that was made and manifest, even the pyramids, all of that, to do what we're doing right now and to train for what we're doing right now. Kind of like the same thing as what I talk about with the German War and the Nazis and the making and the gassing, right? Because all of that is then what built the Rh negative factor. But AB had already been around, right? So it really is a separate faction and that work together, which is why if you didn't have that layer of knowledge, then there'd be no way, you know, and this is also why, you know, and Saint Sarah and all of that, to an immortal. I know, see, it sounds crazy to do a 72 million year mission, but if you're immortal and you never die, and 72 million year mission is going to save the world, then, I mean, right? So whenever I started activating in 2020 and 2021, and because I was in a human body too, and I was like, what the fuck, you know, and all these crazy things were happening, and we were proving things, and we were changing everything, really in 2018, because I also had a personal connection through HP Blavatsky and those lines with India. Okay, so it's like realize I and in tech and we accidentally made India the stronghold that they are, but it wasn't even accident. It was all a deal that was done with HP Blavatsky and India, because the other factions wouldn't let a woman in it at all. And HP knew, although the timeline was tricky, and although there was going to be some things that were going to be built that were going to have to be undone, blah, 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 they knew that we would be able to win in the end, which we did. But even your India people have, and even your Russians, you know, because your Russians are good at certain things, but even your Russians have no idea of the Arabian constructs and the financial alchemy that they were doing. And I'd only know enough that I need to know, right? But I know, if that makes sense. In this now. So it's like I'd come home and we'd be doing stuff and changing stuff and working in groups and doing these healings and da-da-da-da. And I'd hear in my head, what the hell are you? What the hell are you? And I was always like, shit. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out exactly who I am and why I can do the crap that I can do. I mean, to be honest, that's what I'm teaching y'all, because I've learned all this and we're still trying to figure it out. But then finally it was said and it was named, and I was Arxiad, which if you go look it up, it says it's extinct, but no. It's the X, and it's the original Arabians, which is how we were able to get in underneath to pull this up to even see what I'm telling you right now. It was gated within the 6th and the 8th. Now, because realize that everybody that's vaccinated is still developing their etheric body. And meaning, if you were shrink wrapped, because we were, you know, these little fairy houses and this little miniature bullshit. If you walk in somewhere or you see anybody who has this little miniature crap, run. Because especially if they have any witchcraft or you know, they are really, really quantumly whatever, what they're and I mean, this is what they had on the dark side of the sun in Anaheim. You know, they'll have a really big field, and then they have this little bitty box in this huge field, and then you're literally they're you know, Ant-Man, Wasp, Girl, da 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 da. I mean, they did that. It started out being done to prisoners as soon as you went to prison. As soon as you went underneath that portico in prison, they would rip your etheric body from you. And I had it happen to me. I mean, and they took my etheric body, which we allowed them to do because of who I was, and then the collective is my body because of who I am. But I was placed here by the founding fathers in order to make sure that all of our crap didn't get stolen. And the ones that are the true Freemasons, not your Illuminati crazy shit, because, you know, 90% of the good men that were in elk lodges and that paid their tithings, and even 95% of even, well, maybe not as many in the Mormon faith, right? But I mean, growing up in a Latter-day Saints Church of Christ family unit, you know, my grandfather and my uncles all tithed to the church. A percentage went in. They bought the land. You know, they mimicked what they were doing, was mimicking in a way the same thing that these larger organizations were doing in order to make sure at end of days that their families had what we needed, including the watch, the painting, the doll, all these signature pieces that were wrapped up into what I originally started talking about going to the store, and it was $22, right? Because whenever you're in that family line, or whenever you're in that DNA count and your consciousness expands, you have these hidden keys. Well, that's what they took from everybody. To the extent, and this is why I was just screaming the past 2 years in California. Mind you, I was still bound, and I mean, I'm still completely, you know, because of how intense and how long I was here. But I mean, at that point, you know, they were trying to spinal tap me, which would have spinal tapped every single one of y'all because of how I was connected into the human body, which would have meant that they would have taken over fully